Vincent Romano thought loyalty made him untouchable. But in Staten Island, the people closest to him weren't protection, they were the reason everything collapsed.
Welcome to Failed Gangster.
In 1991, Staten Island wasn't just quiet neighborhoods and ferry rides. Beneath the surface, small-time crews fought for money, respect, and survival. Vincent, wrong friends, Romano believed he'd cracked the code. Surround yourself with the right people and you'll rise together. But Vincent didn't understand one brutal truth about the streets. Loyalty is often just temporary convenience. As his circle grew, so did the whispers, the mistakes, and the attention. What started as easy money and trusted friendships slowly turned into paranoia, betrayal, and a downfall Vincent never saw coming. The illusion of loyalty. In 1991, Staten Island still pretended it was different. Different from Brooklyn. Different from the Bronx. Different from Manhattan. Quieter. Safer. Forgotten. But that illusion only worked if you didn't know where to look. Vincent Romano knew exactly where to look. He grew up surrounded by houses that all looked the same, streets that felt calm during the day, and conversations that changed tone the moment outsiders walked away. Staten Island had its own rules. You didn't need skyscrapers or big crews. You just needed the right people. Or at least, that's what Vincent believed. From an early age, Vincent learned that reputation mattered more than money. People watched how you moved, who you stood next to, who stood up for you when things got uncomfortable. And Vincent was always good at standing close to people who looked confident. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room. He wasn't the toughest. He wasn't the smartest. But he paid attention. Vincent noticed how certain guys never paid for drinks. How some names ended conversations instantly. How favors moved faster than cash. And most importantly, he noticed how nobody ever stood alone. So he made a decision early on. If power came from people, then people would be his strength. At first, it looked like he was right. Vincent's circle started small. A few neighborhood friends. Guys he'd known since school. Guys who shared cigarettes, cheap beers, and stories about one day when things would be different. They talked about money like it was waiting just around the corner. And when the first opportunity came, Vincent didn't hesitate. It wasn't glamorous. Nothing illegal looked glamorous at the start. It was introductions. Small errands. Being present. Knowing when to keep his mouth shut. Vincent didn't push. He waited. And that patience earned him trust. Or at least the appearance of it. People started calling him dependable, reliable, loyal. Those words mattered to Vincent more than anything else. Because loyalty felt like protection. In Staten Island, being connected meant being safe. If someone had a problem with you, they'd have to think twice. Someone might know someone. Someone might take it personal. Vincent believed that web of relationships was armor. What he didn't understand was that armor made of people can crack quietly. As his involvement grew, so did his circle. One friend brought another. Then another. Names blended together. Faces changed. But Vincent welcomed them all. More people meant more reach. More reach meant more opportunity. More opportunity meant less fear. At least, that was the theory. Vincent liked being the guy who connected people. The middleman. The one who could vouch for someone. He didn't see it as risk. He saw it as influence. If people needed him, they wouldn't cross him. That belief shaped every decision he made. When someone messed up, Vincent smoothed it over. When someone needed help, Vincent stepped in. When someone owed a favor, Vincent kept track. On the surface, he looked solid. Respectable. Someone who handled business without drama. But drama doesn't announce itself. It waits. Small cracks started forming long before Vincent noticed them. A friend who talked too much after a few drinks. Another who started asking questions he didn't need answers to. Someone else who began acting nervous for no clear reason. Vincent saw it all and dismissed it. He told himself this was normal. That pressure made people act strange. That loyalty meant giving people room to breathe. Cutting someone off too early was how you created enemies. So he kept everyone close. That was his biggest mistake. By 1991, Vincent's name carried weight in certain circles. Not enough to scare anyone serious, but enough to be known. Enough to attract attention from people who didn't earn it. That's when the wrong friends started showing up. They weren't raised with Vincent. They didn't share history. They didn't understand restraint. But they admired the lifestyle. Or at least the idea of it. They liked the shortcuts. The cash. The way doors opened when Vincent walked in. They saw opportunity, not responsibility. And Vincent let them in. Because turning people away felt disloyal. Every time he vouched for someone new, he took a piece of responsibility onto his shoulders. Every introduction tied his name tighter to people he didn't fully understand. Still he pushed forward. The money wasn't huge, but it was steady. Enough to taste something better than his old life. Enough to justify the risk, in his mind. What Vincent didn't realize was how quickly trust turns into exposure. The more people who knew your business, the more fragile it became. Secrets didn't need enemies. They just needed time and loose mouths. And Vincent's circle had both. One night, a casual conversation stopped when Vincent walked into the room. Just for a second. Then it resumed, louder than before. He noticed it, but he ignored it. Another time, someone mentioned a detail Vincent never shared. He noticed that too. But he told himself he was overthinking. Paranoia was weakness, he believed. Trust was strength. That belief kept him comfortable. And comfort made him careless. Law enforcement hadn't made a move yet. But attention doesn't start with sirens. It starts with patterns. Connections. People who show up too often in the same places. Vincent's name was beginning to surface. Not because he was reckless, but because he was connected to people who were. And those people were getting sloppy. The first betrayal warning came quietly. Someone didn't show up where they were supposed to. Someone else suddenly stopped answering calls. A rumor floated through Staten Island, vague, but persistent. Vincent brushed it off. People disappear all the time, he told himself. Rumors spread faster than truth. Still, something felt different. The trust that once felt solid now felt stretched. Like a rope pulled too tight. Vincent doubled down on loyalty, believing it would hold everything together. He didn't realize loyalty was already being traded behind his back. Because while Vincent believed he was protecting his circle, some of the people inside it were already protecting themselves. And in Staten Island, self-preservation always comes first. By the time Vincent started asking the wrong questions, the damage was already done. He just didn't know it yet. The wrong circle gets bigger. By the start of 1991, Vincent Romano felt established. Not powerful. Not untouchable. But comfortable. And comfort is dangerous. He had money coming in regularly now. Not enough to brag about, but enough that he no longer worried about rent or gas. Enough that people noticed he was doing better than before. In Staten Island, that kind of quiet improvement drew attention fast. Some of it was respect. Some of it was curiosity. Some of it was envy. Vincent tried to treat all of it the same, politely, cautiously, without showing fear. He still believed his biggest asset was the people around him. The network. The circle. So when new faces started appearing, he didn't push them away. They came through friends he trusted. Or thought he trusted. A cousin of a guy he'd known for years. A friend of a friend who needed a way in. Someone who claimed they were solid. Vincent listened. He always listened. He asked questions, but never too many. He believed interrogation created distance. And distance created resentment. Instead, he watched how people acted. How they spoke. How they handled themselves when no one was watching. But watching isn't the same as knowing. These new guys talked big. They bragged about connections Vincent had never heard of. They complained about being overlooked. They wanted faster money. Bigger moves. Less patience. Vincent didn't like that energy. But he tolerated it. Because saying no felt like breaking the rules he'd built his life on. Loyalty meant inclusion. Inclusion meant control. At least, that's what he told himself. The problem was that every new person changed the balance. Conversations became louder. Plans became messy. Egos started bumping into each other. And Vincent found himself spending more time managing people than managing risk. He became the fixer. When someone crossed a line, Vincent smoothed it over. When someone got sloppy, Vincent cleaned it up. When someone got scared, Vincent reassured them. That role made him feel important, needed, but it also made him responsible for everyone's mistakes. One guy started drinking too much. Another couldn't stop talking about what they had going on. Someone else started missing meetings, then making excuses. Each incident alone seemed small. Together, they formed a pattern Vincent didn't want to see. Instead of shrinking his circle, he expanded it. More people meant more noise, but also more coverage. Or so he thought. If one person failed, another could step in. If someone disappeared, the operation wouldn't stop. What Vincent didn't understand was that expansion didn't equal protection. It meant exposure. By mid-year, his name was attached to people he barely knew. If someone got caught, Vincent's name would be mentioned, even if he had nothing to do with the mistake. And mistakes were happening more often. A deal fell apart because someone showed up late. Another went wrong because someone panicked. A simple exchange turned complicated because someone wanted to show off. Vincent felt the pressure building. He started sleeping lighter, listening harder, trusting his instincts less. Still, he refused to pull back. Because pulling back meant admitting he'd been wrong. The first real fracture came from someone Vincent had vouched for personally. This guy wasn't reckless. He was worse, desperate. Always short on cash. Always asking for advances. Always promising things would improve. Vincent covered for him. More than once. Then one night that same guy vanished. No calls. No explanations. No goodbyes. At first, Vincent assumed trouble. But then details started leaking. Conversations Vincent wasn't part of. Stories that didn't match. Information that only someone inside the circle could know. Vincent started asking questions. Not directly. Not aggressively. He listened. And what he heard made his stomach tighten. People were nervous. Watching what they said. Watching who was around. Some avoided Vincent altogether. Others suddenly acted overly loyal, too eager to reassure him. That was when paranoia finally crept in. Not the wild kind. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you replay conversations in your head. The kind that makes silence feel loud. Vincent began realizing something uncomfortable. The wrong people weren't just inside his circle. They were shaping it. The loudest voices were now the least reliable. The calm ones were disappearing. The dependable guys had either stepped back or stopped answering calls. And the ones who remained needed Vincent more than ever. That dependence felt dangerous. Law enforcement still hadn't shown its hand, but pressure doesn't need uniforms. It shows up as rumors. Questions from people you don't recognize. Strangers who seem a little too interested. Vincent felt watched. And worst of all, he didn't know by whom. Was it the cops? Or was it his own people? Every scenario led to the same conclusion. Someone was talking. And Vincent was at the center of it. He tried tightening control. Limiting conversations. Compartmentalizing information. But it was too late. The damage had already spread. Once trust fractures, it doesn't heal quietly. It shatters. Vincent's circle wasn't a shield anymore. It was a liability. And the people he'd brought in, the ones he'd trusted to strengthen everything, were now the biggest risk he faced. By the time Vincent realized that loyalty had turned into leverage, his options were shrinking fast. The wrong friends weren't just mistakes. They were the beginning of the end. Paranoia and Betrayal. By late 1991, Vincent Romano no longer trusted silence. Silence meant something was happening without him. The calls slowed down. Meetings became harder to organize. People who used to answer immediately now took hours, sometimes days. When they did show up, they brought excuses instead of answers. Vincent told himself this was normal. Pressure made people unpredictable. But deep down he knew better. Something had shifted. He started replaying every conversation from the past year. Every introduction. Every favor. Every moment he defended someone who didn't deserve it. The picture forming in his mind wasn't comforting. Vincent realized he'd stopped controlling information. Everyone seemed to know things they shouldn't. Details traveled faster than he could track. And once information spreads, it can't be pulled back. That's when paranoia stopped being theoretical. It became physical. Vincent slept less. Listened more than he spoke. He began testing people, casually at first, mentioning small, false details to one person and waiting to see if they surfaced elsewhere. Sometimes they did. Sometimes too quickly. The results terrified him. Someone inside his circle was leaking. Maybe more than one. And the worst part? Vincent didn't know who. Instead of cutting people off, he tried to isolate the problem. He narrowed conversations. Limited access. But isolation breeds resentment, and resentment breeds mistakes. People noticed the change. They whispered about Vincent being nervous. About him losing his edge. Some saw weakness. Others saw danger. A few saw opportunity. The first confirmed betrayal didn't come with drama. It came with absence. One of Vincent's most vocal supporters, a guy who always talked about loyalty, suddenly stopped responding. No calls. No sightings. Just gone. Days later, Vincent heard a rumor. That same guy had been seen talking to people he shouldn't have been talking to. Law enforcement. The realization hit hard. Not because it was shocking, but because it made sense. The loudest loyalty often hides the deepest fear. Vincent felt exposed. Every conversation he'd had with that person replayed in his mind. Every detail he'd casually shared now felt like a weapon turned against him. Panic followed. Not the kind that makes you run, the kind that makes you freeze. Vincent considered disappearing himself. Leaving Staten Island. Cutting ties. Starting over somewhere quieter. But leaving meant admitting defeat. And worse, it meant abandoning the few people who might still be loyal. So he stayed. That decision cost him everything. Law enforcement pressure intensified. It wasn't obvious yet, but Vincent could feel it. Familiar faces disappeared. Questions came from unexpected places. People he barely knew suddenly knew his name. Then came the knock. Not at his door, but on the operation. A small but critical piece collapsed overnight. Someone got picked up. Someone else panicked. Stories didn't match. Names were exchanged. Vincent was officially on the radar. And his circle knew it. That's when self-preservation took over. People stopped protecting Vincent. They started protecting themselves. Friends avoided him in public. Conversations became clipped. Meetings stopped happening altogether. When Vincent pushed for answers, he got silence or half-truths. He was alone, surrounded by people. ACT4 didn't begin with handcuffs. It began with realization. Vincent finally understood that loyalty had never been mutual. It had been transactional. People stayed close while it benefited them. The moment risk outweighed reward, they disappeared, or worse, they talked. One by one, Vincent learned who had turned. Some flipped early. Some waited until the pressure was unbearable. Some claimed they had no choice. The excuses didn't matter. The damage was irreversible. Every betrayal narrowed Vincent's options. Every name mentioned tightened the noose. And every attempt to defend himself only revealed how deeply compromised he was. He tried confronting one of them. The conversation didn't last long. The man wouldn't look him in the eye. He kept repeating the same line, "It wasn't personal." That hurt more than anger would have. Because it was true. Vincent was never betrayed out of hatred. He was betrayed out of convenience. By the time everything collapsed publicly, Vincent's fate had already been sealed in private rooms he was never invited into. The wrong friends he'd protected were now protected, by deals, by cooperation, by silence. And Vincent? He was expendable. Staten Island moved on quickly. It always does. New names replaced old ones. New circles formed. Vincent became a cautionary story told quietly, then forgotten. All that loyalty he believed in? It vanished the moment it became inconvenient. And as the walls closed in, Vincent realized too late that the greatest danger wasn't enemies or law enforcement. It was trusting people who had nothing to lose. The fall and the aftermath. By the time Vincent Romano accepted that it was over, there was nothing left to save. The phones barely rang anymore. The streets felt unfamiliar. Even familiar faces avoided eye contact. Staten Island had quietly decided his story was finished. The final stage didn't arrive with chaos or violence. It arrived with paperwork, closed doors, and people pretending they'd never known him. Everything that once felt solid now felt temporary, like it had always been that way. Vincent spent long nights alone, replaying how fast everything unraveled. Not the big moments. The small ones. The introductions he didn't need to make. The second chances he gave too easily. The warnings he dismissed because they didn't fit his idea of loyalty. He realized something bitter. His downfall didn't come from one mistake. It came from a pattern. When law enforcement finally moved openly, Vincent wasn't surprised. He'd been preparing himself mentally for months. What shocked him wasn't the pressure, it was how little resistance there was. No one stepped up. No one pushed back. No one stood beside him. The same people who once depended on him were suddenly unreachable. Some had already cut deals. Others had disappeared into quieter lives, protected by silence and distance. Vincent faced the consequences alone. In interviews, his name was reduced to a footnote. Not a mastermind. Not a major player. Just another guy who got too comfortable and trusted the wrong people. That realization hurt more than the punishment. Because Vincent had built his entire identity around being the connector. The loyal one. The guy who held things together. Without that role, there was nothing left. No respect. No protection. No purpose. Time moved on the way it always does, without sympathy. New crews formed. New faces filled the spaces Vincent once occupied. The same streets carried different names. Staten Island didn't remember him as a legend or a cautionary tale for long. Just a mistake someone else learned from. From the outside, Vincent's fall looked inevitable. Another criminal story with a predictable ending. But living through it felt different. It felt slow. It felt lonely. And it felt deeply personal. Vincent finally understood the truth he'd avoided for years. Loyalty in that world isn't built on friendship. It's built on fear and benefit. The moment either one disappears, so does everyone else. He had mistaken familiarity for trust. Proximity for protection. And when pressure came, those illusions collapsed instantly. In the end, Vincent Romano wasn't destroyed by violence, ambition, or greed. He was destroyed by misplaced faith. Faith in people who needed him, but never valued him. That's what made his story so quiet. No dramatic shootouts. No headlines that lasted. Just a man left behind by the very circle he believed would save him. And that's the real lesson of Vincent Wrong Friends, Romano. In the criminal world, your biggest enemy is rarely the people coming for you. It's the people standing next to you when everything feels safe. Because when things stop being safe, they're the first ones gone.
The outro of the story.
Vincent Romano didn't lose because he was weak, stupid, or careless. He lost because he trusted people who never truly belonged in his corner. In the end, Staten Island didn't defeat him, his own circle did. Every secret shared became leverage. Every favor turned into a debt. And when the pressure came down, the people he protected were the first to disappear. Vincent's story is a reminder that in the criminal world, your greatest threat is rarely your enemies. It's the friends who know too much, need too much, and disappear when things get real.